I was born in Johannesburg and grew up in Namibia actually, and moved back to South Africa when I was 13. And I left South Africa in 1986 to go to the US, and literally went there and started from scratch again at Grey Advertising. I'd been, I guess you would probably call it, president of Grey, Phillips, Bunton, Mundell and Blake, which doesn't exist anymore. I don't even think Grey exists here anymore. And where I met you, obviously. And went to New York, started at Grey there, and as literally a junior copywriter in a group. And then got a job at Leo Burnett a year and a half later as just a copywriter. Was there for a year and a half, and then got asked to start Hal Riney Partners in Chicago, which was actually there, but just about, it had one account and no one running it. And Hal Riney was, again, it's funny in this business where everyone thinks they're that important, and then you realize guys like Hal Riney, who was one of the true legends of the business, no one even remembers him anymore, but he was one of the true great guys, and the agency was an amazing agency, more like a Grey Phillips was, and very creative, with great accounts. And so I started that and ran that together with a partner for 6 years. And when Hal Riney sold to Publicis, I moved to FCB, which is funny because it was Lindsay Smithers, which was the place I started at in South Africa 42 years ago now, and was there as executive creative director of the Chicago office. Then I became global chief creative officer and actually ran the Chicago office. I was CEO for about 2 years, and then back to the global CEO. And then about, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to leave, and we did a deal where I would work for another 2 years. So I had decided to retire about 5 years ago, when it was still DraftFCB and when the old regime was still running the company. And I did a deal with them where I'd stay on for 2 years, just working on the creative council and a little bit on Beiersdorf. And then Carter Murray came in, took over the agency, and he asked me if I would come back and sort of partner with him on the creative thing and technically be the global chief creative officer, but that we would look for someone who would be, as I said to him, closer to his own age. I think there's a 20-year age difference between he and I, and someone who had at least half the energy that he had, which I have maybe an eighth of. And so we started looking, and we found Susan Cradle, and that was about in June last year when we finally managed to sign her. And she started in January, and in, I guess it was October of last year, he said to me, well, when she starts, would you stay on as chairman? So as my wife said to me, because my wife had this horror that I was coming back, and she has this expression which I think is somebody else's, but she uses it perfectly. She said, which is, I love you, but not for lunch. And so the thought of me being home was as bad for her as probably it would have been for me. So I said, absolutely, I'll do it. And the thought of actually working with him and Susan in whatever capacity they wanted me to work in was great. So I am doing the chairman role. And the two countries they asked me to be to work with the closest, one South Africa and the other's India, and they just happen to be obviously South Africa for obvious reasons, and India because it's probably my one of my most favorite countries in the world, and I love the people there and work very closely with them and have a great relationship with all of them. So those are the two countries I'm working with, and that's what I'm doing. South Africa never ceases to amaze me, and It's funny. I literally before this discussion that we're having, I was talking to the whole creative department, and one of the questions at the end, they said, if you had to rank the top 3 agencies in the network, what would they be? And I said, you know, if I forget what I would think, but if you went to anyone in our network and asked them what the top 3 is, South Africa would be either 1 or 2. I don't even think it would be 3. It would be 1 or 2. And it's something that everyone in the network is really proud of. And I think this latest thing that that we've done with the Maharishi Institute and now being 51% black owned is enormous. And if you go back, and this is something that I think people who've been here for a long time knows, we've been pushing for something special to happen here and to get control back to South Africa for a long, long time. It goes back, I think, 10 years, 11 years. And I think we finally managed to make it happen, and it was a brilliant idea on Brett and Graham and the other guys' parts. And Carter obviously played a huge role, and when he heard about it, he you know, made it happen with IPG, he and Neil Miller, and that's an enormous thing. And I think, you know, everyone sees this place as an icon of what is great about our network.